started.
All right.
Hey, this is HP Life. I'm Matt.
And I'm Brian.
And this is the 43rd episode of HP Life. And this is where we talk about Highland Park Christian Church, celebrate its members, talk about whatever's going on.
Yeah.
And so we had the last of our tough questions sermons yesterday for the year. And what was the title again? It was specifically
How to help someone who's thinking about quitting church or dealing with church hurt.
Dealing with church
hurt's kind of the phrase. And before we even move on, can I just issue an apology? In my head, I was going to give a little better trigger warning than I actually did. My bad.
We
Should
dealt
have
with
done
some
better.
sensitive stuff.
We always do that in the past, and I did not do as well as I wanted to yesterday. So I apologize. I'll do better in the future.
Yeah, and if you haven't watched the sermon, here's your disclaimer, your trigger warning for that is
we
dealing
definitely
with some abuse stuff.
Definitely planned it on one that was not a family Sunday for a reason.
Yeah.
So.
And then we had a lot of response yesterday, more than normal, and so we had a bunch of carryover, and we're going to try to hit some of those today. One of them, let's just start in here. How do we respond to people who haven't personally experienced church hurt, but are struggling because of the hurt they've seen others, whether it's friends that have been hurt, or they've heard situations on the news, or they've seen church abuse in history.
Yeah.
And so how do we respond to those people?
Yeah. In some ways, that's an apologetics question of like, can I trust the faith where I've seen these things?
Yeah.
And we don't ever want to defend the indefensible. And where churches get out of whack, it's because, and that's probably too lame of a term, but when they mistreat people or there's abuse or whatever, then they should be held accountable. And when that happens, let's be clear, they are out of line with God's will and his commandments. So there's a separation between what God wants and what that church or institution does. And so we should point out when they do bad things, it's because they're out of line with what God wants. I also think it's good to say not to defend that, but just to bring into perspective that churches and Christian institutions also do amazing things. And sometimes when I interact with people who are frustrated about this, you kind of hear like, take away tax exemptions for all churches. You know, just kind of like this organized religion thing is bad for everyone. If you did that, then the hungry and the homeless and the sick would go unserved next month. I mean, maybe the government gets to a place where you do that at some point. That's kind of a legal question. But I'm just saying, if you took away what God is doing through churches and institutions, who feeds the hungry? I mean, you parachute me into any place in the world. It's the Christians who feed the hungry and who house the homeless and who care for the trafficked. What hospital are you going to that's not founded by a faith base? There's St. Francis, St. John, for a reason. You just see that. And so I just think that brings into perspective and those people are serving the most vulnerable because they believe at their very core that God created all people in his image and thus they have value. And so we care for them. And so I think it's good to bring that into perspective to help people see that God is for you and don't excuse the abuses, but also realize that when people live out God's commands, it's a good thing for the world.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other part of that is that not everybody's going to see things the way you do, especially if you're a Christian. If they've had church hurt, they're either not a Christian receiving that hurt, or they're a Christian, they received the hurt, and they're trying to figure it out. And so even just going into it a little bit more gently and trying to figure out, assessing the situation, because you're going to treat somebody who's not a Christian in that arena a little bit differently than you're going to treat somebody who's a Christian experienced it.
Yep.
So the next question is, there are some with church hurt who fear to commit to a church community or church membership, therefore leading to extended church hopping or church shopping. At what point of their distance from the church is it safe to talk about, and how would you go about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that we need to empathize with those folks and to realize there may be some times where they are not just putting down roots immediately, that they can find a safe place for them. I think about people who have been hurt. I think about women. I think about people of color. Unfortunately, I have friends who fit one of those categories, and there's been churches that weren't safe for them. And so sadly, you want to check those things out and make sure it's a safe place. But eventually, people are called to live in Christian family and Christian community. And if I was talking to somebody who had had a dating relationship go south, I would encourage them, like, take some time away, like, process what happened. Did they change? Did I choose poorly? Did we just not communicate well? Like, what happened? Like, diagnose that and don't rush back into another relationship. Take some time. But it doesn't mean you got to live lonely the rest of your life if you really want to have friends or date or whatever, that you don't have to never try that again. So that wouldn't be healthy necessarily, just to give up on the whole world or a friendship or a relationship or a church relationship, that there's at least a time where we're healing. And then there's a time where in that healing, your goal is that you can commit to a church family again. And so I don't know when the right timing would be, but probably depends on the amount of hurt or distance that they have.
And whether it's timing or whether it's attitude, because, I had a conversation with somebody in the last year who had experienced church hurt and in a situation where the church had made some big decisions for a period of time that weren't what they agreed with. And so they had to reassess, that wasn't the church that they felt like they were part of. And so they've done a little church shopping and stuff. My encouragement to them was don't give up. And I even reminded them, I'm not saying that I feel like that's what you're doing. I just want to give you the encouragement to keep looking. I didn't want to judge them because I felt like they were a little wounded. And they, I didn't feel like they were in the wrong for taking time. But I did say, what kind of a Christian brother would I be if I didn't say something? And so
I'm so thankful that the Gentiles from Galatians 2, who Peter greatly offended by ignoring them. Just think about, from a historical perspective, what would have happened if Peter offends them, shows prejudice against them. Paul comes and addresses it. But what if they would have just all checked out and been like, you know what, we're done. Generations of their family would have been impacted. And as best we can tell, most or all or a bunch of them stayed committed to Christ even through that hurt, even though it took hurt. So it's not even just about you, but it's about those who are around you and who will follow you, that you hope that they can reconnect.
Forgiveness is not easy. It's hard, but yet there's something very beautiful about it on the other side. Which maybe kind of helps us with this next question. What is a good approach for repenting or course correcting when maybe you're not certain of the whole details, but you know that somebody has either been offended by somebody in the church that or is accusing. Maybe you don't know all the details, but you're friends with that person in the church. And how do you handle that when it's messy? Because you're friends with them, but this person's accusing them, and
just pick sides and start throwing punches.
Put a lot of social media posts about it.
That's when you really want to get on social media.
No, these are not the real. Scratch the last two things we said. Don't do that.
It's a great question. This happens, and it seems like there's times where maybe you don't need to engage farther. But there's times where maybe when it's the right setting, it's just the two of you or maybe three of you visiting and it's safe. Because there's times where if you give people an opportunity, they're going to slander somebody publicly in a small group setting or whatever. I think about that as I lead different groups or whatever. I don't want to make it easy for people to kind of slip and say too much that slams somebody else. So it needs to be the right setting, but maybe in the right setting, if you feel like this is really an area where this person needs help, then you could say, hey, I could kind of tell that you had said this. You don't have to, but would you want to talk to me about that? I'll keep it in confidence, if I can, unless somebody's in danger or whatever. But I would like to keep it in confidence. And could you share with me if you want me to help you make peace with this person, or if there's something that may need addressed? And so, I think it's important to say that you care for them, without saying, hey, tell me everything you want and I'll totally believe it.
Yeah.
That we want to say, we'd be glad to listen to you and pray with you. And I'm not planning to take any action items, tomorrow, but it might be appropriate to do that sometimes.
Maybe another thing would be if maybe they're hurt and maybe they haven't left the church, but maybe they have church hurt. Then the next thing would be very biblical, which would be to go to them and say, hey, you know what? There's a place in Scripture that talks about what to do in Matthew 18.
Yeah.
And my suggestion would be, according to that, if you've gone to them and or maybe they're scared or whatever, then take an elder with you.
Yeah.
And very, very biblical approach that Jesus has said to handle that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, well, Tough Questions is over for another year. No more tough questions? No, I'm just kidding.
You know what? I was just reflecting on this month, and I am so thankful that we have a church family that's okay with tackling tough questions like this. I think there's a culture in our church that is okay talking about these things without people flying into hysterics. One of the things you always fear as a communicator is that people will hear something that you never said because they have an emotional reaction to it. And as we went through that, I didn't even catch a whiff of any of that. Maybe it's out there somewhere, but we dealt with some kind of emotional, tough topics.
Yeah,
where
this year.
Not everybody may have agreed exactly with where we were on every church position, but people said, I learned some things, I listened, and we can be together, even if we have a slight disagreement or angle about how we might interpret this text or that. And so to me, that's a sign of a strong church that's growing together that can work through these things. And so I feel like I've learned a lot. And one of the things I've learned is when you get through tough things together, you're stronger for it. And so I hope that can be a result for us.
Well, and I think, too, a lot of times you're going to deal with this stuff eventually.
Yeah.
And by us doing it through a Tough Question series, we're actually proactive and we're talking about it in a calm time maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe we're hitting a topic that's hot, right now.
Yeah.
But it's not like at our door.
Right.
And where we have to deal with it.
Right.
And so we're choosing to deal with it up front.
Yeah. I felt better, including a little bit about politics yesterday.
Yeah.
Because while it's always on the front pages, we're not in an election cycle.
Yeah.
And a year and a month or two from now, it's going to be hot, you know? So it's good to talk about, Christian perspectives before the emotions get too high. So yeah, that's a good point.
Well, so that does close out the Tough Question series. We do have a new series coming out that starts this Sunday. How long is that series going to be?
I don't remember.
It's a few weeks.
It goes through November.
Oh, it's 13 weeks.
It goes through November. Yeah.
I think it's like 10 or 13 weeks.
Yeah.
Something like that. It's Love Never Fails. And that's an old 80s rock song, I think. No.
1 Corinthians 13 would be a great chapter to read
we're looking at
as we prepare for that. So, and don't think it's just for like married folks. That's not even the context of the chapter at all.
No.
It can be applied to marriage, but it can be applied and should be to all of our lives. And so we'll especially talk how it applies to how I relate to fellow believers and also how I relate to people outside the church.
We have a couple of opportunities that we wanted to highlight today. One of them is on Wednesday nights that's going on. We've got the Adventure Kids Club and HB Youth, 6:30 to 8. And besides that, we've also got...
We kicked off Roots. It's an adult small group, and we'll be there during that same window of time in the evening. And each lesson is a little bit standalone. And this week we're going to talk about how do I study the Bible, how do I read the Bible. And we started last week with a lesson on prayer, and it was awesome. We had a really cool group of people who have been at the church for decades and people who have been at the church for weeks and everybody in between, people with kids, people without kids, young, old, family from PECE church. It was just really cool. So
that's cool.
You're all invited to come.
Cool. And then the next thing is we've got a run coming up.
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
So Highland Park has supported Blackbox International for over a decade, and they help boys rescued out of trafficking. And we do a run/walk/stand and cheer every year. And this one is October 14th. It's down by the river. And you do need to sign up if you would like to volunteer, or actually had somebody say, hey, I'm glad to volunteer. Let me know just this morning, which was great. But if you want to run or walk with your family, you can do a 1K, a 5K, or a 15K, and we'll send you all the logistics. It's free to register. That gets you a shirt, which is great because people always ask me about my shirt. Tell me about your shirt. And I get to tell them about the ministry. And then there's also a link that you can donate if you want to donate. And so that's great. And so we'll put the link up, and you can go there and find out about it. So we'd love for you to join us.
And I don't know what the weather's going to be like. I know last week it was really nice and felt really like fall.
Yeah.
It's supposed to heat up a little bit more this week,
Yep.
but it does feel like fall's in the air.
Yeah.
Fall's one of my favorite times of the year. Actually, it is my favorite.
Me too.
Of the seasons. And so maybe we'll just close out this week that what is it you like about fall? And it's like football, the fair, fall weather. I mean, everything starts with an F, I guess. But put something in the chat. Let us know. And,
Falling leaves.
Falling leaves. Yeah, definitely. Those colors are so cool.
Yeah.
But put something in the chat. Let us know what you're thinking. And let us know how we can pray. But that's it for this time for HB Live. Thanks.
Thanks all.
See you. Bye-bye.